It's like a high energy beam that just shoots right through you and makes a picture and, oh no, you have pneumonia. I'm Dr. Josh Jarvis. Let's talk about X-ray. Again, welcome. I'm Dr. Josh Jarvis, radiologist, and today we're going to talk all about X-rays. But first, what video would be complete without a little disclaimer? This video may contain actual medical images from my own clinical practice and from reference sources. Patient confidentiality is of utmost importance, and any and all personally identifiable information has been removed. Images are presented solely for educational purposes. Any similarity to any specific patient, living or dead, is very likely coincidental. Besides, the only way anybody will ever know it was you that did that incredibly embarrassing thing that required an X-ray is if you tell them. Now, let's talk about X-rays. We'll start with a little history lesson. Back in the olden days before X-rays, you'd get hurt and go to the doctor or blacksmith or friendly neighbor with a new toolkit they'd bought at the mercantile. And they'd say, "Oh, I think your arm may be broken. Let's cut it off and find out. Here, drink this whiskey and bite this stick." No, I don't need to wash my hands first. Horse manure is probably good for it. Well, in 1895, German physicist Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen produced a new form of electromagnetic radiation he called X-rays. X because it's commonly the mathematical symbol for unknown, and he basically had no idea what he was working with. At one point, he was trying to block the X-rays with various materials, and he caught a quick glimpse of his skeleton hand. After that, he decided to continue his work in secret because, honestly, what else would you do once you're down the rabbit hole of developing a haunted death ray? 2 weeks later, he took the first official X-ray photo of his wife Anna Bertha's hand. Anna Bertha is a very old-timey name. Now, reportedly, when she saw the X-ray, she exclaimed, "I have seen my death!" Because, of course she did. I mean, this is some weird stuff going on. Your husband's all, "Anna Bertha, come to my lab and help me," and you're all, "Boring," but you're a woman in the late 1800s, and you can't just call things boring or they'll think you're a witch and burn you or drown you or pile bricks on your chest or something. Then Wilhelm says, "Stand over there," and you say, "Why?" And he says, "Put your hand up." And then 4 days later, or however long pictures took to develop back then, he shows you, and the last thing you were expecting was some creepy skeleton hand, because skeletons are symbolic of death. And you had no idea that death was inside your body the whole time. So the medical use of X-rays soon became apparent because now you could look inside the body without having to cut people open. But other uses also became common, such as this device here. Now, this is an X-ray machine used for checking how well new shoes fit. They'd have one of these in the corner of the shoe store and you'd stick your feet in and look through the little viewfinder. Names for these machines included shoe fitting fluoroscope, X-ray shoe fitter, footoscope, pedoscope. Of course, this was well before anybody knew about the risks of radiation, so of course, once these risks became better known in the late 1920s and into the 30s and 40s, these machines were quickly banned. Wait, no. A lot of these machines were still in use in the late 1970s. I mean, how else are you supposed to see if your shoes fit? Press on your big toe with your thumb? Yes. So that's a little bit of the historical background on X-rays. But how exactly are X-rays made? Well, inside an X-ray machine, there's a vacuum tube where high voltage electricity is sent through a wire which makes electrons boil off and fly toward a rotating metal anode, typically made of tungsten or molybdenum. As the electrons collide into the anode, most of the energy is converted to heat, but about 1% is converted to high-energy X-ray photons. Now, you may remember hearing about photons in your high school science class in relation to light. And in a way, it's essentially the same concept, with the difference between light photons and X-ray photons being that X-ray photons are much higher energy. High enough energy to go straight through your body. And It's differences in how many X-rays either get through or absorbed that ultimately make an X-ray picture. And these differences are determined by density. As you probably know, density is the amount of stuff per unit volume. How many atoms or molecules are packed in a given space. Less dense materials let more X-rays through because there are fewer atoms to interact with the photons and stop or scatter them. More dense materials let fewer X-rays through because there are more atoms to stop or scatter them. When the X-rays hit the film, or nowadays the detector, it turns the image darker. So low density things like air show up black, and higher density things like bone or metal show up white. Intermediate density things like soft tissues are shades of gray in between. Let's take a look at some examples. Here's a normal chest X-ray. You can see that the lungs are darker because they're filled with low density air. The high density bones are lighter. The intermediate density soft tissues of the heart and overlying skin and musculature are gray. Here's a normal abdominal X-ray. You can see darker areas representing gas within the bowel, as well as subtle variations of gray for the remaining abdominal organs. And of course, the white bones of the spine and pelvis. Different types of high-density contrast material can be either injected, swallowed, or otherwise, what's a polite way to say it, placed into the body to help evaluate internal structures. Barium is a high-density chemical element commonly used for evaluating the gastrointestinal system. The patient will typically drink the barium to evaluate the upper GI tract, or can be given a barium enema to look at the colon. Here's an image from an upper GI study. This study actually used a double contrast technique with high-density white barium coating the walls of the esophagus and stomach, and darker air is present in the lumen from a fizzy drink that produces carbon dioxide. Contrast material containing iodine can also be injected into the vessels to show possible abnormalities in the arteries or veins. Here's an image from an angiogram showing the arteries of the pelvis and upper thigh. Abnormal areas of density or lucency can be helpful in diagnosing underlying problems. In this chest X-ray, there's increased density in the lungs, where the normally air-filled lung has been filled with denser fluid and pus in this patient with pneumonia. This abdominal X-ray shows a sliver of lucency above the liver, representing free air within the abdomen. This is bad because it typically means there's a bowel perforation, which means non-sterile bowel contents, i.e. poop, can spill into the abdominal cavity and cause deadly infections. The linear lucency in this X-ray represents a fracture. Metal is very dense and shows up bright white on X-ray. Here's a patient with hip replacements. And here's spinal fusion hardware. And here are a bunch of foreign bodies. So using knowledge of the normal density patterns found in the human body, as well as the appearance of different diseases, injuries, and other abnormalities, radiologists such as myself evaluate X-ray images to discover potential problems that may need treatment. Now, before I go, I wanted to briefly mention some of the pros and cons of X-ray. First, the pros. X-ray is relatively cheap, at least as far as medical imaging goes, and is readily available. Every hospital and most clinics have access to X-ray. X-ray also has very high spatial resolution. That's the ability to identify and distinguish between tiny things. And lastly, radiation exposure is relatively low, particularly as compared to other imaging modalities such as CT. Now, as for the cons, while the radiation dose is relatively low, it's not zero, so there does remain some risk. X-ray also has relatively poor soft tissue contrast, which is the ability to distinguish between things of slightly different density. This can be seen with abdominal X-rays, where the abdominal organs appear as a mass of gray. Lastly, standard X-ray is two-dimensional, which can limit precise localization of abnormalities. So hopefully you've enjoyed this brief introduction to X-rays. As always, I'd love it if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. And if you've enjoyed learning about X-rays, I'd encourage you to take a look at my video on CT, available now. I'll see you next time. So you promise there won't be a creepy skeleton hand? Yeah, no, don't worry about it.